Okay, so this next patch that I want to show you has some functionality that other synthesizers of this time simply did not have. I mean, I think I've seen it on a couple of synthesizers, sort of weird side-related synthesizers. I'm pretty sure that some of the early Korgs had at least this possibility in one way, but not two ways, like the Yamaha does. So this is a unique thing for a keyboard-based musical synthesizer, but it's not a particularly challenging thing for example, a modular synthesizer. So if you had a modular synthesizer, you'd be able to do this, but I'd imagine that most people with a modular synthesizer would not do this. It just doesn't seem like the sort of sound that modular people would have. However, I do remember that in the 80s, when more envelope-based functionality came around, this type of sound showed up in a number of songs. In fact, usually when people were trying to emulate a sort of trumpet. I remember I had an ESQ1 that had sounds that sounded like this, and it just sort of showed up in music. What's that song? A Final Countdown, I think, has a little bit of this going on. Anyway, the point of the matter is, interesting things can happen when you modulate the pitch of your oscillators based on the attack, but not overall. So they basically, you cause a slight variation in pitch at the beginning of a sound. And this is a type of articulation, which is to say a time-based change that gives the sound character. Of course, if the pitch of your oscillator is varied over an extensive amount of time, then you're going to have a hard time playing notes because your two oscillators would be, doing crazy whatever. What this is in this case, a very short attack envelope that takes place at the beginning of the sound just to give the sound a character instead of like doing it long enough that it sounds like some kind of crazy pitch bend. The Yamaha CS-15 has this ability in this section called glide. You might notice that there is a portamento. Glide is different. And more often, although there are synths that call portamento glide, the Japanese tended to call glide this function where a very basic envelope was applied to pitch at the beginning of the sound. So in this case, the CS-15 has this really cool thing, and I'm not entirely sure why they gave this function such an important placement, but they did. And here it is. It creates exactly what we're talking about. You have a time setting which sets how long it takes this attack envelope to go from 0 to its highest point. And then you have the amount that you apply it to the individual oscillators. So we have this at a setting where the time is relatively slow and the VCO1 depth is relatively low going in the negative direction, and the VCO2 depth is relatively low going in the positive direction. So basically the envelope can be applied to the oscillators in a positive way, starting in a low and scooping up to the actual note, or in the negative way. Actually, that is the negative way. The positive way would be starting high and then scooping down to the note. So we have both of them happening, and without much more ado, we get to the actual sound. And the difference, it's very subtle, but it's definitely a sound. Let's do it without anything, and you can hear. There's something about that sounds like the embouchure of a trumpet, and so it was frequently used in fake trumpet sorts of sounds, but it is a great attack transient to give character to a relatively basic sound. Also, you might notice that I have some envelope applied to both of the filters, and it is the second envelope. Both of the amps are being affected by the first envelope, which is a pretty basic envelope, but I wanted to have kind of a brightness increase happen. So I made this shape in EG2, which is being applied to both filters. So we have kind of this pitch effect happening with both oscillators, and then this sort of filtering effect happening with both filters. And we also have them set to band pass with a little bit of resonance, so they're kind of more mid-rangey, giving it, again, kind of more of a strident sound. Back in the day, whenever a synthesizer sound even slightly vaguely made a person imagine some other instrument, they would say, well, that sounds like that instrument, or that is that instrument, which is really cute. But you have to realize back in that day, a trumpet was a trumpet, and anything that sounded just like a trumpet or vaguely similar to a trumpet was like a trumpet. These days, because we've had synthesizers faking, making these not very realistic trumpet sounds for a decade and a half, and then more realistic trumpet sounds, and then really realistic trumpet sounds, we can listen back to something like this and go, that does not sound like a trumpet. It sounds like a synthesizer. But back in that day, it did sound like a trumpet. Adding a little bit of LFO to the pitch of one oscillator kind of gives that an interesting character. Kind of like vibrato a little bit. And then I've applied that to the VCA. So we have the pitch of oscillator 2 being modulated by the fast-moving LFO for a sort of vibrato, and we have it applied also to VCA 1, giving it sort of a tremolo. But anyhow, that is an interesting way to add attack transients to a sound, putting envelopes on the pitch for very short durations. Oh, we might want to hear what this sounds like if we had long duration. Let's try that. They eventually get there. Let's hear it from the same direction. And having two different speeds means you get some interesting chorusing outcomes. But yeah, that is a glide function found on the CS-15, which is a lot of fun, but there are some ways that you can use it.